imagine creating a style of art and architecture, right? Something so mind-bendingly complex that centuries later, people are still trying to replicate it.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you pour vast fortunes into this style, you use it to build, like, the most iconic structures on the planet, and the name we all know, this magnificent movement by, well, it was actually an insult.
Yeah, early critics literally called it the flawed pearl.
Exactly. It comes from the Portuguese word Baroque, which just referred to an ugly, uneven, misshapen pearl.
Right, or depending on which historical linguist you happen to ask, it might actually stem from a medieval Latin term used by scholars, barocco.
Oh, I didn't know that. What did that mean?
It was a term that described a logical argument that was just absurdly, uselessly complicated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, the philosopher Michel de Montaigne even used it to describe things that were just bizarre. It was absolutely a term of derision.
That is just such a wild beginning for an era that gave us some of the most celebrated high art in human history.
It really is.
Well, welcome to our deep dive into the Baroque. Today, we're unpacking a massive stack of your sources. We've got historical accounts, architectural analyses, musical critiques, all to understand this period that fundamentally rewired how human beings experience the world.
We are looking roughly at the 17th to the mid-18th centuries here.
Right. And our mission today is to move way beyond that dusty textbook definition of the Baroque as just, old fancy buildings with too much gold leaf.
Because to truly grasp this era, you really have to realize that before the Baroque was considered fine art, it was a weapon.
A weapon. Wait, how so?
Well, it was a tool. I mean, we are conditioned today to treat art as this purely intellectual exercise, right?
Yeah.
You walk into a pristine museum, stand behind a velvet rope, read a placard, and just quietly observe.
Right, very polite, very restrained.
Exactly. But the Baroque was the exact opposite of that polite experience. It was a calculated, multisensory campaign designed to just capture human emotion.
So it wasn't supposed to be subtle.
Not at all. It wanted to grab you by the collar and shake you.
Okay, so we have to figure out how a term for bizarre and uselessly complex became the absolute defining aesthetic of an entire era.
It's a huge shift.
It is. And I'm looking at the timeline in our sources, and the catalyst seems to be one of the biggest institutional crises in history, which is the Counter-Reformation.
Yeah, that is ground zero. The Catholic Church basically convened the Council of Trent from 1545 to 1563.
Because they were bleeding followers.
Exactly. They were hemorrhaging followers of the Protestant Reformation. And the Protestants had a very specific visual strategy at the time.
Which was what, exactly?
They were promoting a severe, austere aesthetic. I mean, they whitewashed church walls, smashed statues, and just completely stripped away the sensory distractions.
So they wanted people to focus purely on the written word of God.
Right. Internal piety over external showiness.
Okay, so if we think about this in modern terms, they were essentially offering the public a stripped-down acoustic set, like just a guy and a guitar, no backing track, and demanding you focus strictly on the lyrics.
That's a great way to put it. And the Catholic Church recognized that, well, while that appeals to the intellect, it doesn't necessarily thrill the masses.
They were losing the PR war.
Big time.
Yeah.
So they decided to put on a stadium rock show. The Council of Trent actually issued decrees stating that art should communicate religious themes by appealing directly and overwhelmingly to human emotion.
So they didn't just want to teach the everyday worshiper.
No, they wanted to overwhelm them.
Completely. It's basically the ultimate immersive marketing blitz. They understood you don't win a culture war with pamphlets alone. You win it with spectacle.
Exactly. Spectacle is persuasive.
But looking at the sources, this wasn't purely a Catholic phenomenon forever, right? It kind of bled over the ideological lines.
It did, yeah. The awe-inspiring power of this style was it was too effective to ignore.
Oh, really? Who else picked it up?
Well, Lutheran Baroque develops shortly after. In parts of Germany, Lutherans actually weaponized the Baroque style as a confessional marker of their own identity.
Wow, okay. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, it was particularly a response to Calvinist iconoclasm, where Calvinists were actively destroying religious images.
Right, taking austerity to the extreme.
Exactly. So the massive Dresden Frauenkirche is a prime example of the Lutheran response. They used that same overwhelming grandeur to say, like, hey, our faith is just as glorious.
So proving that the mechanism of sensory overload just worked across theological boundaries.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we know they were competing for souls and using spectacle to do it, but I kind of want to dig into the physical mechanics of this. How exactly did they pull off these effects?
Because it wasn't just decorating buildings, right?
Right. Looking through the architectural sources, they were actively redefining reality.
They really were mastering optical illusions on a massive scale. They realized early on that if you can manipulate a person's perception of physical space, you manipulate their state of mind.
Okay, I have to stop at this one specific example from the sources because my brain just cannot process the math of it.
Oh, which one?
Francesco Borromini's design for the Palazzo Spada in Rome, it's just wild.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That is a masterpiece of illusion.
He built this courtyard hallway that is physically, 7 meters long? But to a person standing at the entrance, it looks 30 meters long.
It's incredible.
How does the human eye actually fall for that when we're talking about a physical space built out of solid three-dimensional stone?
Well, he achieved it through a ruthlessly precise use of forced perspective. He didn't just build a straight hallway.
Okay.
He angled the floor so it sloped slightly upward.
Oh, wait. The floor was sloped.
Yes, and he angled the ceiling so it sloped downward. And he used columns lining the hallway that physically shrink in size the further back they go.
That is just insane.
He actually worked with a mathematician to calculate the exact convergence points. So your brain, which assumes walls are straight and columns are uniform, interprets that shrinking space as massive distance.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's a statue at the end of the hallway that looks life-size from the entrance, but if you walk up to it, it only comes up to your thigh. It's like 60 centimeters tall.
It's literally an architectural deepfake.
It really is.
And this sensory manipulation wasn't just limited to the ground level, right? If you walked into a church and looked up, the walls literally seemed to vanish.
Right, you're referring to quadratura.
Yeah, the Tremblay ceiling painting.
Exactly. The artist would paint these fake architectural frames on the curved vaults of a ceiling, using extreme foreshortening.
To make it look 3D.
Yes, and they painted the sky beyond those fake frames so perfectly that it looked as though the roof of the church had been blown completely off.
That must have been terrifying and amazing for someone back then.
Oh, for sure. From the floor, crowds of painted angels and saints appear to be spilling over the edges, like floating down into the physical space of the viewer.
And the painters working on canvases were doing something kind of similar with light, weren't they? I mean, Caravaggio is constantly mentioned in these sources.
Yes, Caravaggio was pioneering chiaroscuro.
Remind me, that's the intense contrast, right?
Exactly. Chiaroscuro is the intense, violent contrast of light and dark. Caravaggio just totally abandoned the tranquil, evenly lit, perfectly balanced scenes of the Renaissance.
Right. Everything used to be so softly lit.
Instead, he painted his subjects as if they were in a pitch-black room with a harsh, single theatrical spotlight aimed right at them.
It's very dramatic.
Highly dramatic. And they are never static. They're in mid-action, muscles straining, faces showing visceral terror or ecstasy, their clothes blown by unseen winds.
Okay, I have to push back on this entire philosophy for a second, though.
Sure, go ahead.
We have shrinking hallways, fake ceilings, theatrical spotlights. Doesn't this inherently make the emotion kind of, I don't know, fake?
How do you mean?
Like, if I am brought to tears or filled with religious awe because a room is mathematically designed to make me feel small and disoriented, am I experiencing genuine faith? Or am I just falling for a parlor trick? It feels incredibly manipulative.
That is the exact tension of the era. You've hit the nail on the head.
Good to know I'm not the only one feeling manipulated.
But you have to remember, to the Baroque mind, that manipulation wasn't a trick. It was actually the vehicle for spiritual truth.
Explain that. How is a trick the truth?
We have to understand their core belief. Knowledge and faith aren't just concepts to be learned intellectually. They must be felt in the body.
Okay.
If heaven is infinitely glorious, a flat, calm painting doesn't convey that truth. You have to physically simulate the disorientation of the infinite.
Ah, I see.
The illusion forces the viewer into an immediate visceral reaction that just bypasses the rational brain. To them, the physical trickery was totally justified because the emotional destination was real.
So the end totally justifies the means. You can't just tell someone about the divine. You have to simulate it until they feel it in their gut.
Precisely. They engineered environments where rational thought was simply overwhelmed by sensory input.
Which honestly makes perfect sense for Rome. But buildings have a fatal limitation.
They don't move.
Right. They rely on the audience traveling to them. So if the Baroque was this ultimate tool for projecting power, it couldn't just stay in Italy. It had to cross borders.
And it did, massively.
But the sources show that as it spread globally, it mutated. It definitely wasn't a one-size-fits-all export.
No, it was incredibly elastic.
Yeah.
And the contrast between how different rival nations adapted it tells you basically everything about their cultural priorities.
Yeah, the contrast between France and Spain in the sources is almost comedic.
It really is.
You have King Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who eventually builds Versailles, and he's expanding the Louvre in Paris. So he invites Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the absolute rock star of Italian Baroque, to design it.
A huge deal at the time.
Right. And Bernini submits these sweeping, dynamically curved, wildly dramatic blueprints, and Louis just flat out rejects them.
Yeah, Louis found them far too exuberant.
He wasn't a fan of the drama.
Not that kind of drama.
Yeah.
The French monarchy wanted to project absolute, unquestionable authority, not emotional volatility. So they developed what became known as the Louis XIV style.
Right, which looks very different.
Very. It retained the massive scale and the gold of the Baroque, but it imposed severe rational control. It was obsessed with strict symmetry, straight lines, and classical proportions. No undulating walls.
Meanwhile, the Spanish Catholic Church takes the Italian blueprint and just turns the volume up to 11.
Oh, absolutely.
They developed the Churrigueresque style, named after a family of architects, and the descriptions of these cathedrals in the sources are dizzying.
Spain totally embraced the sheer excess.
Yeah.
If you walk into a Churrigueresque cathedral, you will see altarpieces so dripping with gold leaf and intricate carvings that the underlying architecture just completely disappears.
Just covered in decoration.
Yes. And they relied heavily on Solomonic columns.
What exactly does a Solomonic column look like compared to a regular one? I saw that term a lot.
Well, a traditional Roman column is straight and stable. A Solomonic column twists like a corkscrew.
Like a spiral?
Exactly. It spins upward in a spiral, which creates this relentless kinetic energy.
Yeah.
Your eye is physically incapable of resting when it looks at them. They create a constant sense of restless upward motion.
Wow. And then on the flip side, you have the Dutch Republic, who take a completely different path.
Right, because their context was totally different.
Exactly. They are a newly independent, highly prosperous, mercantile society. And crucially, they are Protestant. So they aren't going to build these ecstatic, gold-dripping altars to overwhelm peasants.
But they still needed to project their newfound wealth and civic pride.
Yeah, you still want to flex a little bit.
Exactly. So they adopted a highly pragmatic, restrained version of the Baroque. Instead of imported marble, they used local brick.
Makes sense for the Dutch.
And the Royal Palace of Amsterdam is a monumental structure, but it relies on strict symmetry and a lack of external ornamentation. It basically proves the Baroque could communicate massive civic dignity without the theatrical religious ecstasy.
But I think the most fascinating mutation in the sources is what happens in the Americas.
Oh, the New World adaptations are incredible.
Right, because when the Spanish and Portuguese empires colonized the New World, they brought these architectural blueprints with them to convert the indigenous populations. But the actual structures look wildly different from what was built in Madrid or Lisbon.
Right. This is the phenomenon of missionary Baroque.
How did that work exactly?
Well, the European colonizers provided the core structure, but the actual physical construction and detailed artistry were executed by indigenous and Criollo artisans.
And those artisans didn't just blindly execute a European vision.
Not at all.
It reminds me of, like, open source software.
Oh, how so?
Like, the Europeans provided the core code, the layout of a basilica, the concept of an altarpiece, but the indigenous artisans entirely rewrote the user interface.
That's a great analogy.
They infused the structures with their own local materials, their own visual languages, and their own cultural sensibilities.
You see this incredible hybridity across Mexico
Yeah.
and the colonial murals of Peru.
What kind of details stand out?
You have traditional Catholic saints, but they are suddenly surrounded by local, tropical flora and fauna instead of European motifs. You see indigenous facial features on the angels.
Oh, wow, so really making it their own.
Exactly. You see vibrant, pre-Columbian color palettes that never existed in Rome. The Baroque proved to be an elastic framework that could be translated into almost any cultural dialect.
But again, we run into the limitation of physical objects. Architecture, paintings, altarpieces, they just sit there.
True.
If you really want to saturate human emotion on every level, you have to export that sensory overload into the very air people breathe. Which brings us to the airwaves and the stage.
The music and theater of the time.
Right. The Baroque completely rewrote the rules of sound and performance.
And this is where that original insult, the flawed pearl, really comes back into play.
Yes, I loved this detail in the sources. The term Baroque music started as a literal complaint from a disgruntled critic.
A very harsh review.
In 1733, a critic reviewed an opera by the French composer Jean-Philippe Rameau and absolutely hated it.
He was not a fan.
No, he wrote that the music was du Baroque. He complained that it lacked a coherent, hummable melody. The meter was constantly shifting, and it was packed with unremitting dissonances.
Even the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote that this new music was harsh and unnatural.
Why were they so offended by it?
Because the musicians of the era were doing exactly what the architects were doing. They were breaking the classical rules to force an emotional reaction.
Okay.
They started using massive amounts of ornamentation, improvising wildly, and focusing on jarring contrasts in volume and speed.
But to achieve those contrasts, they needed new technology, didn't they? I mean, the harpsichord wasn't going to cut it anymore.
Definitely not. The problem with a harpsichord is the mechanism.
What's wrong with it?
It plucks the string. So when you press a key, you get one volume. It doesn't matter how hard or soft you strike the key, the output is exactly the same.
So you literally cannot build emotional tension through volume.
Exactly. You can't start quiet and swell to a loud finish.
Yeah.
Enter Bartolomeo Cristofori.
Ah, the keeper of the instruments for the Medici family in Italy. And he invents the pianoforte.
Which literally means soft, loud in Italian.
That is so literal.
It really is. Cristofori replaced the plucking mechanism with a hammer that strikes the strings. So for the first time in history, a keyboard player could actually build a crescendo.
They could start with a whisper, and by simply striking the keys harder, they could build to an absolute scream.
Exactly. The instrument itself suddenly had dynamic emotional range.
It's a complete game changer, and the playwrights were tearing up the rule book right alongside the musicians.
Oh, absolutely. Look at Lope de Vega in Spain.
Right. For centuries, theater had been chained to Aristotle's ancient rules, the unities of action, time, and place.
Meaning a play had to have one single plot, take place in one specific location, and occur over the span of a single day.
The idea was to keep things clean, logical, and easy to follow.
Right. And Lope de Vega just threw all of that out the window.
He wrote plays that spanned continents and decades. He mixed high tragedy with low comedy in the exact same scene, completely disregarding the rigid boundaries of classical theater.
He favored pure vitality and chaotic action over stiff rules.
Even ballet got a makeover, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was transformed from a simple court dance into a highly structured, emotionally resonant performance of political power. King Louis XIV even founded the first professional ballet school.
But this continent-wide rejection of the old rules across all these mediums, it kind of raises a fundamental question.
Why did it happen then?
Yeah, why? Why did everyone, from architects to composers to playwrights, suddenly decide to embrace chaos and discard the clean, rational math of the Renaissance? Because the Renaissance was obsessed with perfect geometry and order.
Well, what broke? The world broke.
That's a heavy way to put it.
But it's true. If we synthesize the historical context, the 17th century was an era of profound, inescapable trauma.
You mean like the wars?
Yes. You have the horrific violence of the 30 Years' War ravaging Central Europe, wiping out massive portions of the population.
Yeah.
You have the fracturing of the singular church into warring Protestant and Catholic factions. The old systems of absolute authority and certainty were actively collapsing around them.
So the world wasn't a neat, perfectly ordered Renaissance painting anymore. It was chaotic, terrifying, and unpredictable.
Exactly. Cultural historians like Walter Benjamin actually argue that the intense, obsessive, overloaded quality of the Baroque is a direct response to that trauma.
Oh, so it's reactionary.
Very much so. The clean, rational rules of the past simply weren't sufficient to express the terror and complexity of a world that was falling apart.
They needed a new, complicated, dissonant language to process the chaos they were living through.
Exactly. The dissonance in the music was just a reflection of the dissonance in their reality.
That completely changes how I view this art. It wasn't just showing off wealth. It was almost a coping mechanism.
It really was.
But of course, no cultural intensity can sustain itself forever. You can only handle so much stadium rock before your ears ring, and you desperately want to sit in a quiet room.
Which leads us to the inevitable exhaustion of the style and the transition into the Rococo.
Right, the Rococo, also known as the Pompadour style, named after Madame de Pompadour in France. The Rococo basically took the fluid, curving lines of the Baroque, but scaled everything way down.
It moved away from monumental, terrifying religious awe and focused on small, intimate domestic spaces.
So a lot lighter.
Much lighter. The heavy gold, deep reds, and violent shadows were replaced by light pastels, pale blues, and pinks. They focused on asymmetry, using motifs of seashells and flowers.
The sources also point out a massive, sudden fascination with East Asian chinoiserie.
Oh, yes.
They started importing Chinese lacquerware and incorporating Asian motifs into their European furniture. Why the sudden pivot to Asian aesthetics?
It was pure escapism, honestly.
Escapism from what?
Well, after a century of heavy, intense European religious trauma and monumental power struggles, the aristocracy craved a fantasy. To them, these imported Asian aesthetics represented a delicate, distant, and unburdened world.
So it was lighthearted, joyful, and entirely divorced from the heavy theological baggage of the Baroque.
Exactly. But the real backlash was still brewing.
Oh yeah, because by the 19th century, the neoclassical movement arrives, and they absolutely despised the Baroque.
Despise is almost an understatement.
They wanted a return to the pure, clean, democratic logic of ancient Greece and Rome. And the quotes from the critics in our sources are genuinely brutal.
Yeah, the art historian Francesca Malizia called Baroque masters like Borromini and Bernini a literal plague on good taste.
Wow. And the British critic John Ruskin went even further.
What did he say?
He didn't just think the forced perspectives and twisting columns were ugly. He literally declared the architecture to be morally corrupt.
Morally corrupt.
Because it was deceptive. It lied to the eye.
That is a harsh critique. But, the pendulum of history never stops swinging.
It always swings back.
It really does. The Baroque experienced the ultimate resurrection. By the late 19th century, the Romantic movement began to appreciate individualism and intense emotion again.
Right. They loved the drama again.
Exactly. The Belle Epoque in France built this spectacular Palais Garnier opera house in Paris, which is basically a massive homage to Baroque opulence.
And the art historian Heinrich Wölfflin finally published a defense of it in 1888, recognizing it not as a decline from the Renaissance, but as a valid, brilliant movement in its own right.
And honestly, it's still alive. Look at the postmodern architecture of the late 20th century.
Like Michael Graves designing these playful, oversized, dramatic buildings.
Exactly. Or look at the fashion of Gianni Versace.
Yeah.
The maximalist ceramics and silk shirts covered in complex, twisting golden acanthus leaves. It's all Baroque.
It really reveals a fundamental truth about human nature, I think.
What's that?
That our taste operates on a continuous pendulum. We swing back and forth between two poles. The desire for clean, rational, logical order, and the deep, inescapable craving for passionate, theatrical excess.
Yes. Whenever one generation gets too stiff and mathematical, the next generation invariably breaks the rules, twists the columns, and paints the ceiling open to the sky.
The flawed pearl never really died. We just keep stringing it onto a new necklace. And that brings us to the end of our journey today.
It's been quite a ride.
We've seen how a Catholic PR strategy to awe the masses gave us everything from mind-bending optical illusions and the invention of the piano to modern ballet and global architectural hybrids spanning from Amsterdam to Peru. Thank you for sharing this fascinating stack of sources with us and joining us on this deep dive.
And it is a profound reminder that the environment around us, the buildings we enter, the music we hear, is never just decorative. It is a highly engineered reflection of what we fear, what we desire, and how we understand the universe.
Next time you find yourself entirely captivated by an immersive experience, whether you're sitting in a dark theater feeling your pulse race to a jaw-dropping blockbuster movie, or you're lost in a video game with completely impossible, gravity-defying architecture, ask yourself what is actually happening to you. Are you just being entertained? Or are you experiencing a modern manifestation of the Baroque? Because sometimes the most beautiful things we create are designed specifically to shatter our polite, rational observation, bypass our brains entirely, and go straight for our hearts.
When you think about the great invisible forces that shape our physical world, you probably picture gravity pulling the planets into orbit.
Right, or maybe tectonic plates crashing together in slow motion to build mountain ranges.
Exactly. Big, massive, heavy things.
Yeah.
But right now, at this exact moment, inside your body, all around you, anywhere on this planet where there's a drop of water, there is a completely invisible, silent force dictating life and death.
And it's happening on a cellular level millions of times a second.
Yeah, it really is. Today, we are unpacking the hidden thermodynamics of osmosis.
It is entirely invisible, yes. And yet the stakes could not be higher for you. Every single time you drink a glass of tap water, you are essentially initiating a thermodynamic pressure war in your bloodstream.
A pressure war. I love that phrasing.
It's true. If this mechanism stopped working for even a fraction of a second, biology as we know it would catastrophically fail. Your cells would either violently explode or shrivel up into tiny raisins.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are using a comprehensive breakdown of osmosis to rescue this concept from whatever vague, stuffy memories you might have of staring at a high school biology chalkboard.
Right, because it's so much more than that.
It is. We are going to reveal osmosis for what it truly is, which is a relentless, unstoppable physical engine. It explains why your houseplants stand upright, why table salt is like a lethal weapon to a garden slug, and how pure water essentially bulldozes its way through microscopic barriers.
It really is the ultimate biological tightrope walk.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how it works, we have to look at the foundational mechanics first.
Right. So osmosis, at its core, is the spontaneous net movement of solvent molecules. And in biological systems, that's almost always water.
Just water doing its thing.
Exactly. These water molecules move through a selectively permeable membrane. They travel from a region of high water potential to a region of low water potential.
Right, allow.
Yeah. The entire driving desire of this physical system is just to equalize the concentrations on both sides of that barrier.
Let's unpack that concept of water potential for a second, because that phrasing can sound a bit backward to people.
But it definitely can, yeah.
It's easier to think about it in terms of the stuff dissolved in the water, right? The solute. Like water wants to go where the party is.
That's a great way to look at it.
If one side of a barrier has a massive concentration of dissolved salt, and the other side is mostly pure, uncrowded water, that pure water is going to rush across the barrier to balance out the ratio.
Precisely. The pure water is driven to dilute the highly concentrated side.
Think about a simple slice of potato dropped into a glass of heavily salted water.
Oh, the classic potato experiment.
Right. So the water trapped inside the potato cells is relatively pure compared to the extreme salinity of the glass. Because of osmosis, the water inside the potato realizes it's drastically outnumbered by the salt on the outside.
It's a localized imbalance.
Yeah, so it rushes out of the potato through the cell membranes and into the glass. It is this microscopic tug-of-war for water, and the heavily salted environment wins.
And as a result, the potato loses all its internal water pressure, and it just shrinks. It loses its turgor pressure.
It's wild. And what's truly fascinating is how long human beings have recognized and utilized this effect.
Oh, absolutely. Centuries before anyone had the microscopic tools to understand the cellular mechanics, the localized flow of water driven by salt gradients was observed as far back as the construction of the Egyptian pyramids.
Wow, really? The pyramid?
Yeah, but the first properly documented scientific observation didn't happen until much later. It was 1748 by a French physicist named Jean-Antoine Nollet.
Nollet's experiment is just a wonderfully bizarre piece of scientific history.
It really is.
So picture this. Nollet takes a cylindrical glass vial and fills it to the absolute brim with alcohol.
To the very top.
Right. Then, instead of sealing it with a cork or a glass lid or something normal, he takes a piece of damp pig bladder, stretches it over the neck of the vial, and ties it down incredibly tightly.
As one does in the 18th century.
Naturally. And finally, he takes his whole contraption and completely submerges it in a large basin of pure water.
He does this to ensure no air can interfere with the boundary. So he leaves it submerged for about 5 or 6 hours.
And when he comes back to check on it,
the result completely shocks him. The vial, which remember was already completely full of alcohol, is somehow holding even more liquid.
Silver-filled.
Exactly. The pig bladder acting as the cap wasn't just bulging upward, it was stretched to its absolute physical limit.
The pressure inside that glass vial had become so immense that when Nollet took a sharp pin and pricked the top pig bladder, a pressurized jet of alcohol shot out over a foot into the air.
It is a phenomenal visual of thermodynamic force in action.
A foot into the air, just from water pushing in.
Yeah. The pure water in the basin was crossing through the biological membrane of the pig bladder in a relentless attempt to dilute the alcohol inside the vial.
So the water could get in, but the alcohol couldn't get out.
Exactly. The water could easily push its way in, but the larger alcohol molecules couldn't push their way out. This created a massive compounding buildup of internal pressure.
And that buildup of pressure, that literal physical forcing of water, eventually gave us the name we use today.
Right, the etymology is really interesting.
A few decades later, another French physician, René Dutrochet, was studying this exact phenomenon. He combined the Greek words for within and outer with the word ismos, which literally translates to push or impulsion.
The push.
Yeah, so you had endosmos and exosmos, which eventually merged into the term osmosis.
That etymology of the push is scientifically perfect because Nollet's pig bladder wasn't just an eccentric parlor trick.
No, it wasn't.
That piece of dead animal tissue perfectly mimics the selectively permeable membranes that wrap around and protect every single living cell on Earth today.
Right. Which brings us to how this actually operates inside living things.
The biological border control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we look at the cellular level, biological membranes act like incredibly strict border control. They are made of phospholipid bilayers. You have these molecules with water-loving heads and water-fearing lipid tails sandwiched together.
And because of that oily, hydrophobic core, these biological borders are generally completely impermeable to large molecules.
Or to anything carrying an electrical charge,
Yeah,
right?
so polar molecules, stray ions, large proteins, complex sugars, they hit the membrane and just bounce right off. They cannot cross without an active transport mechanism.
But nonpolar molecules can get through.
Yeah, nonpolar molecules like lipids or tiny dissolved gases like oxygen can slip right through the cracks.
But wait, water is a polar molecule. It has a slight positive charge on one end and a negative charge on the other.
That's true.
So logically, water shouldn't be able to easily cross that oily border control either, right?
It really shouldn't. If water had to rely purely on squeezing through the lipid bilayer, osmosis would happen far too slowly to sustain complex life.
So how does it work?
Nature evolved a brilliant workaround. Water sneaks through the barrier via highly specialized protein channels called aquaporins.
Aquaporins.
Yeah, you can think of them as selective pore flow mechanisms.
They're like a biological VIP entrance.
That's a great analogy.
A dedicated fast-pass lane exclusively designed to let water molecules flow in and out of the cell at staggering speeds, driven entirely by osmotic pressure while keeping everything else locked out.
Exactly. And plants are the absolute masters of exploiting this VIP entrance.
Oh, they rely on it completely.
They do. When water enters a plant cell through osmosis, it creates something called turgor pressure. This is the exact same pressure that stretched Nollet's pig bladder to the breaking point.
So the water rushes in and pushes outward against the plant's rigid cell wall.
Right, and that internal water pressure is literally the structural support that keeps a soft-stemmed plant standing upright toward the sun.
So when a plant cell is sitting in an environment with plenty of pure water, like a hypotonic solution, the water relentlessly pushes in.
Yes, and the cell swells up tight against its rigid wall, becoming what botanists call turgid.
Turgid. Fully hydrated and stiff.
But if you subject that plant to a hypertonic solution, say a flood of salty seawater, the osmotic gradient flips.
The water runs away.
Exactly. The pure water inside the plant cell aggressively rushes out to dilute the salt in the soil. The cell shrinks, becoming flaccid.
And if the salt concentration is too high?
If it's high enough, a violent microscopic event called plasmolysis occurs. The plant loses so much internal pressure that the inner cell membrane actually tears away from the rigid outer cell wall.
Yikes. That effectively kills the tissue.
It does. It's fatal for the cell.
Okay, wait, this brings up a really crucial distinction. Plant cells have those thick, tough cellulose walls to act like a pressure vessel.
Right, they have structural reinforcement.
They can handle that massive influx of water pressure. But human cells don't have rigid plant cell walls to protect them. Our cells are just like squishy little balloons of membrane.
Very squishy, yes.
So what happens to us if the balance is off? Why don't we just pop?
Well, the reality is that human cells are incredibly vulnerable because of that exact lack of a rigid cell wall. We are terrifyingly sensitive to both dehydration and overhydration.
The forces at play are just immense.
They are. If you place a human red blood cell into a hypotonic environment like a beaker of pure distilled water, the water will rush into the cell so fast and with such thermodynamic force that the cell membrane simply cannot contain it.
Because there's no wall to stop the expansion.
Exactly. The cell undergoes cytolysis. It violently swells and bursts.
The structural integrity just completely fails.
Complete failure. Poof. Conversely, if you drop that same red blood cell into a hypertonic environment like extremely salty water, all the water inside the cell violently rushes out.
Trying to dilute the salt outside.
Right. And the cell rapidly shrivels up into a spiked, dysfunctional shape. This is exactly why medical IV fluids aren't just pure water. They are meticulously formulated saline solutions,
You need that perfect balance.
maintaining an isotonic environment where the concentration of dissolved solutes inside and outside the cell is perfectly, precisely balanced, is a minute-by-minute requirement for human survival.
It really reframes how you look at biology. Osmosis is an engine for life, but when the environment shifts, it becomes a remarkably swift killer.
Oh, nature has some grim examples of this.
Yeah, I was looking at the text, and there's some notoriously dark examples, like if a storm surge drops a freshwater aquarium fish into a highly saline saltwater puddle.
The maladaptive salinity kills it almost instantly.
Because the water inside the fish's cells desperately rushes out to dilute the ocean.
Right, and the animal fundamentally dehydrates while completely submerged in water.
It is a brutal paradox, dehydrating while underwater.
It really is.
And then there is the classic, slightly cruel garden example, pouring table salt on a slug or a leech.
Oh, the visual is very visceral.
You pour the salt, and the slug immediately shrivels and foams.
Yes, it's a very vivid demonstration of osmotic harm. When you pour salt onto a slug's highly permeable skin, you are artificially creating a massively hypertonic environment right on its surface.
So the pure water inside the slug rushes out.
Exactly. The relatively pure water inside the slug's cells rushes out across the membrane to try and dilute that localized mountain of salt. You are weaponizing osmosis to fatally dehydrate the creature in a matter of seconds.
And it's so easy to picture what's happening there as the salt actively sucking the water out of the slug, right? Like a dry sponge soaking up a spill.
That is the mental model almost everyone has.
The salt pulls the water.
Right.
But and here's where it gets really interesting. We have to completely dismantle that idea. Because that mental image, the idea of salt sucking or pulling water across a barrier, is actually a massive scientific misconception.
It is entirely wrong, conceptually.
Completely wrong.
The actual physical mechanism driving osmosis is heavily misunderstood, even by people who work in adjacent scientific fields.
So what are people getting wrong?
Well, people usually rely on one of two incorrect models. The first is that the solute, like the salt, is simply diluting the water, so the water naturally just diffuses from where it's highly concentrated to where it's less concentrated.
Sort of random particles bumping around until they spread out evenly.
Right, simple diffusion.
Mm.
The second misconception is the bound water model, which is the sponge idea you just mentioned.
That the salt is magnetically pulling it.
Exactly. This is the assumption that the salt molecules somehow reach out with a chemical magnetic force binding to the water molecules and physically dragging them across the membrane.
But both of those intuitive ideas are conclusively false based on the thermodynamics.
Yes, they are.
The diffusion idea is broken because under certain thermodynamic conditions, osmosis can actually drive water across a membrane toward a higher concentration of water.
Which completely violates the rules of simple diffusion.
Right. And the attraction idea, the sponge model, is wrong because osmosis is what physicists call a colligative property.
That is the crucial pivot point right there.
A colligative property.
Yes. A colligative property means the physical effect depends absolutely and purely on a number of dissolved particles, the raw molar concentration, and it has absolutely nothing to do with their chemical identity.
So the water doesn't care what is dissolved in it.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if the solute is salt or glucose or some synthetic polymer. It doesn't matter how hydrophilic, how much it loves water, the solute is.
So it could be a chemical pull.
Right. If it were about chemical attraction or magnetic pulling, the specific chemical identity of the solute would change the force of the pull. But it doesn't. 100 particles of salt generate the exact same osmotic pressure as 100 particles of sugar.
Okay, I have to stop you and push back here because this is where my brain starts to hurt.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
If the solute isn't pulling the water, and it's not just simple diffusion, then what invisible hand is actually driving this car? Why does the water move with enough force to explode a blood cell?
To understand the why, we have to step out of biology entirely and dive into thermodynamics.
Okay, let's do it.
You cannot explain osmosis accurately without looking at the mechanical forces between molecules. The true explanation involves a principle called the virial theorem.
The virial theorem. Let me see if I can translate this because it gets deeply counterintuitive.
Go for it.
Tell me if I had this right. Think of the pure water molecules on one side of a membrane, like a room full of toddlers running wild.
Okay, I like this.
They're bouncing off the walls, bumping into each other, creating a ton of kinetic energy and high pressure.
Chaotic, highly active system, yes?
Now, on the other side of the membrane, you have salty water. You've added solute molecules.
Yeah.
Instinctively, you'd think adding more stuff to the room would increase the pressure.
Because there are more bodies in the room?
Right? But the virial theorem says it's the opposite. Adding the solute is like adding adults into that room full of toddlers.
Oh, that's clever.
The adults grab the toddlers' hands. They're physically attracted to each other, which calms the whole room down. The toddlers stop bouncing off the walls as much. The overall pressure on the walls actually drops.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. The intermolecular attraction between the water molecules and the solute molecules actually reduces the overall thermodynamic pressure of the system.
But lowers the pressure.
Yes. The pressure exerted by the water molecules on each other in the salty solution is objectively less than the pressure exerted by the wild, free-bouncing molecules in the pure water.
So because the pure water side has more wild toddlers bouncing around,
the pure water physically pushes harder against the membrane.
Because its internal mechanical pressure is higher.
Exactly. The pure water essentially forces its way into the lower pressure salty side. The salt isn't pulling the water in. The pure water is aggressively bulldozing its way across the membrane to escape its own high-pressure environment.
Escaping.
Yes. It will keep bulldozing until the pressure on both sides reaches an equilibrium. It is a pressure-driven process of viscous flow, not just random molecular diffusion.
That fundamentally flips the whole concept upside down for me. It's not a pull. It's a relentless push.
A relentless push.
And this leads to an absolutely staggering realization about energy. When that pure water bulldozes its way in and forces liquid to rise up against gravity like shooting alcohol out of Nolet's pig bladder, it is performing physical work.
It is.
It is literally converting ambient heat from its surroundings into mechanical energy.
That is the thermodynamic beauty of the system. The kinetic energy of the water molecules, which is derived from the ambient temperature of the room, is being harnessed and converted directly into the mechanical work of moving mass and generating pressure.
It's an engine.
Osmosis isn't just a biological quirk. It is a naturally occurring thermal engine.
And if pure water is relentlessly bulldozing its way across membranes, generating massive mechanical pressure and heat, well, humans are never going to just let a natural engine sit there unexploited.
No, we certainly wouldn't.
If nature built a pressure engine, engineers were always going to figure out a way to harness it for our own technology.
And we have, quite successfully, though our most famous application involves fighting a brutal war against it.
Right, reverse osmosis.
Yeah.
We hear this term constantly in the context of water filtration and desalination plants.
It's everywhere.
If natural osmosis is pure water bullying its way into salty water, reverse osmosis is humanity fighting back with brute force.
Very stubborn brute force.
I always think of it like biological bouncers at a nightclub. You have a barrier, the membrane, and a massive crowd of salty, undrinkable seawater on one side.
And natural osmosis dictates that any pure water on the clean side should rush over to join the salty side.
Which is the exact opposite of what a desalination plant wants.
Exactly. We want the clean water separated.
So instead, we apply massive, overwhelming external mechanical pressure to the salty side. We push so incredibly hard with industrial pumps that we overcome the natural thermodynamic pressure.
We overpower the engine.
Yeah, we force the water backward through the membrane. The pure water gets squeezed to the clean side, and the unwanted salt is left behind, like kicking out unruly guests at the door.
It's an incredibly effective way to turn unpotable seawater into clean drinking water, which of course is vital for global infrastructure.
But there's a catch.
Right, there is. Because you are actively fighting a fundamental thermodynamic force, it requires immense amounts of electricity to run those high-pressure pumps.
It's expensive.
Very. However, engineers are now perfecting a fascinating, much more energy-efficient variation called forward osmosis.
Forward osmosis, where we stop fighting the engine and let it do the work for us.
Precisely. Instead of using blunt force mechanical pressure, forward osmosis uses a highly concentrated draw solution to coax the water through the membrane naturally.
How does that work in practice?
Imagine you have a tank of heavily contaminated, dirty water. You place a membrane in the middle. On the clean side, you place a draw solution that has a phenomenally high osmotic pressure.
Way higher than the dirty water.
Exactly. The pure water from the contaminated side naturally bulldozes its way across the membrane to dilute the draw solution, leaving all the heavy metals and bacteria behind. No massive electrical pumps required.
Wait, let me think through the logistics of that.
Yeah.
If you use a highly concentrated draw solution to pull the pure water out of the toxic water, aren't you just trapping your newly clean water inside that highly concentrated draw solution?
You are?
If you use salt, you just turn toxic water into salt water. Are we just replacing a dirt problem with a salt problem?
That is the exact engineering hurdle. In industrial setups, you often have to do a secondary thermal separation step to remove the draw solute, though it still ends up being more energy efficient overall.
Okay, that makes sense.
But there is a brilliant alternative for specific use cases. What if your draw solution is made of something you actually want to consume? What if you use a highly concentrated ingestible glucose syrup as your draw solution?
Oh, wow. So the pure water bulldozes across the membrane, filtering out the deadly pathogens from the floodwater, and it dilutes the glucose syrup.
And you don't even bother separating it.
You just drink the resulting sugar water directly. That is an incredible application for disaster relief or like military survival gear.
It is incredibly elegant. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the applications are scaling up in ways that sound like science fiction.
Tell me more.
Beyond filtration, the real frontier is salinity gradient power. Think about where a massive river empties into the ocean. You have a colossal volume of pure fresh water relentlessly crashing into a massive volume of highly concentrated salt water.
The ultimate osmotic imbalance.
Exactly. The difference in thermodynamic pressure between those two bodies of water holds a staggering amount of potential energy.
We can harvest that?
By directing that spontaneous natural mixing across specialized semi-permeable membranes, we can harness that bulldozing force to spin turbines. It presents a completely sustainable, continuous, renewable energy source.
That's amazing.
It doesn't rely on the sun shining or the wind blowing. It just quietly runs on water's relentless desire to balance its own internal pressure.
So what does this all mean? We're literally running power plants on water's desire to mix.
Yes, and researchers aren't just looking at macro-level infrastructure either. On the microscopic scale, medical engineers are using these exact same thermodynamic principles for precise drug delivery inside the human body.
Really? Like osmotic implants?
Exactly. They are manufacturing tiny implantable capsules.
Wow.
Once inside you, the natural osmotic pressure of your own bodily fluids forces pure water into the capsule.
Which pushes the medicine out.
You got it. It slowly and mechanically pushes liquid medication out into your bloodstream at a perfectly steady, controlled rate. No batteries, no moving electronic parts, just pure thermodynamics.
It's a profound journey. From generating zero-emission power for coastal cities to delivering life-saving chemotherapy drop by drop.
The engineering applications of this invisible biological force are expanding at an astonishing rate.
We started this deep dive with a shriveling potato slice and a French physicist accidentally shooting alcohol across a room in 1748. And by simply asking why the water moves, we've ended up at the absolute bleeding edge of global water sustainability, renewable energy engineering, and targeted nanomedicine.
It's quite the evolution.
It really forces you to view osmosis not just as a passive chapter in a biology textbook, but as a dynamic, relentless engine that powers both life and technology.
It is the ultimate reminder that the most powerful forces in our universe aren't always the loud, violent ones. More often than not, it's the silent, microscopic balancing acts that hold the entire physical world together.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, tracing the journey from a top piece of pig leather to the invisible mechanics of the virial theorem, all driven by the simple, unstoppable desire of water to find its equilibrium.
And before we go, I want to leave you with one final, slightly futuristic thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've talked about how forward osmosis can perfectly filter water using consumable draw solutions without heavy electrical pumps. Now imagine a multi-generational interstellar spaceflight decades away from Earth.
Power and replacement parts for mechanical pumps will be incredibly scarce.
Exactly. So could the key to long-term survival in deep space rely on closed-loop osmotic systems? Could we design artificial, membrane-based ecosystems aboard starships that perfectly mimic Earth's water cycle, recycling waste into drinking water entirely through passive, silent thermodynamics?
That is fascinating.
Or even further, could specialized engineered microbes utilizing osmotic pressure be deployed to terraform the toxic, heavy metal soils of distant exoplanets? Literally bulldozing alien environments into habitability one microscopic drop of water at a time.
Now that is a deep dive worth taking. Keep questioning the invisible forces running the world around you, and as always, stay curious. If you step into an elevator in almost any modern skyscraper today, you're actually participating in this massive multi-billion-dollar lie.
Oh, absolutely. It's hidden right in plain sight.
Right. You step in, you look at the panel, and you'll see buttons for floors 11, 12, and then suddenly 14. 13 is just, well, it's just completely gone. It's such a striking anomaly in our otherwise hyper-rational world.
It really is. I mean, we build these incredible monuments to engineering and physics, right? We rely on absolute rigid mathematical precision to keep these towers from falling over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet right there on the control panel, we just willingly abandon numerical order. We just pretend the number doesn't exist.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack the surprisingly complex, incredibly pervasive world of Triskaidekaphobia. That is the official term for the fear of the number 13.
Yes, and we will also be exploring its very famous cousin, the fear of Friday the 13th, which goes by the even more complicated name, Triskaidekaphobia.
That's a mouthful, right? But okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack this.
So we tend to brush this off as just a harmless superstition, something silly to joke about while telling ghost stories around a campfire.
Sure, like avoiding black cats or not walking under ladders.
Exactly. But the source material we are exploring today reveals that it is actually a powerful psychological force. I mean, we are looking at a phenomenon that actively dictates global real estate markets, naval architecture, massive government bureaucracies, and even the U.S. space program.
It's just wild to me. So, to understand how a single, seemingly arbitrary number holds so much power over us, we need to trace the infection back to patient zero, so to speak.
Right. We have to find where it started.
Because I always assumed this was some ancient primal dread, like, I don't know, the Romans banned it, or it was etched into a cave wall somewhere by early humans.
It is completely natural to assume an entrenched cultural fear like this must have ancient origins. We always want to project these things deep into the past.
Yeah, to give it weight.
Exactly. But the earliest documented evidence of 13 being, broadly considered unlucky only dates back to post-Middle Ages Europe. There is literally no documented proof of it being a widespread ancient belief.
Wait, really? Post-Middle Ages? I mean, that is practically yesterday in the grand scheme of human civilization.
Yeah.
What actually triggered it then?
Well, we can actually trace one of the earliest associations to a parlor game of all things, specifically tarot cards.
Oh, wow, tarot cards.
Yeah. Around 1450, a specific tarot deck emerged in Italy, the Visconti Sforza deck. In this game, one of the trump cards represents death, and it was numbered 13.
No way. So it literally started as a literal card game mechanic.
Pretty much. Over the next few centuries, this specific numerical association just slowly baked into European culture. By the late 1700s, writers were stating explicitly that 13 was always considered unlucky, mostly because of this card's dark imagery.
I am just trying to picture how a local card game becomes a massive societal phobia before the internet or, mass media. It must have merged with something else people already cared about deeply.
That's a great point. It needed a bigger vehicle.
Right, like religion, because if I recall, there's a whole superstition about 13 people sitting at a dinner table, right?
Yes, that is the other major origin point. So around the same time the Tarot Association cemented itself, we start seeing documents warning that if 13 people sit at a table together, one of them will die within a year.
That is remarkably specific and dark.
Very. A scholar in the 1770s, Johann August Ephraim Gutze, theorized that this stemmed directly from the Last Supper, where Jesus and his 12 disciples sat down for a meal. 13 people in total.
Oh, okay. And Judas, the betrayer, is the 13th person. So the narrative perfectly aligns with betrayal and death. That makes total sense.
Well, it aligns a little too perfectly, honestly.
Really?
If you read the actual biblical text, it says absolutely nothing about the seating order of the apostles. Nothing at all.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The idea that Judas was specifically the 13th to sit down was pushed heavily by English language sources much later, mostly in the 1890s. They essentially retrofitted the biblical story to match the modern fear that had already
Oh,
developed.
my gosh. It's like cultural retconning.
Yeah.
We developed a phobia and then went backward through history with a red marker, circling anything that vaguely fit our narrative to justify the fear.
What's fascinating here is that mechanism of backward justification is incredibly powerful. You see it perfectly with the myth of the Knights Templar. Have you heard the story that Friday the 13th stems from their historical arrest?
Oh, definitely. A very famous thriller novel from the early 2000s cemented that idea in my brain. You know the one?
Mm-hmm.
The story goes that King Philip of France ordered the Templars arrested on Friday, October 13th, 1307.
Right. And the date itself is actually historically accurate. King Philip did order the arrest on that specific day.
Okay, so that part is real.
It is. However, the concept of Friday the 13th being an unlucky day simply did not exist in 1307. The connection between the Templars' downfall and the modern phobia is a complete invention from the 20th century.
You're kidding.
Not at all. It was just pasted onto a real historical event to give the superstition a sense of gravitas and ancient mystery.
We literally manufactured a historical backstory to make our irrational fear feel legitimate. That is just incredible. I imagine we've done this with other mythologies too, then.
And we certainly have. In fact, in the 1960s, there was a book that tried to link the fear of 13 to a Norse myth. It claimed 12 gods were dining in Valhalla when Loki, the trickster god, crashed the party as the 13th guest.
And let me guess, that led to a god's death.
Exactly.
I mean, that sounds incredibly cinematic. Almost too neat of an origin story.
Because it is completely fabricated. The original source text for that myth, Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda, doesn't emphasize 12 gods, there is no formal dinner party, and the number 13 never even appears in the story.
Wow. So we have these hazy, fairly recent, and largely fabricated origins, yet somehow this fear leaps from tarot cards and fictionalized history books directly into the physical concrete and steel of our modern cities.
It really does.
Let's revisit that skyscraper elevator from the beginning of our deep dive, because I really want to know, how prevalent is this missing button, actually?
It is basically an industry standard. In 2002, Otis Elevators did an internal review and estimated that 85% of buildings with their elevators, specifically those over 12 floors, completely skip the 13th floor on their panels.
Wait, 85%? That is not a quirky architectural choice. That is systemic erasure.
It's massive.
I suppose if you're building an early skyscraper, going up that high was already terrifying for the general public, right?
Absolutely. Early skyscraper critics in New York were actively warning developers not to build higher than 13 floors.
What were they so afraid of?
They cited all sorts of things: ominous shadows cast over the city, severe street congestion, plummeting property values, and the very real fear of uncontrollable fires at that unprecedented height.
Ah, okay. So the sheer height was the actual hazard, but the number 13 just became the psychological scapegoat for all that anxiety.
Exactly.
But, you can't just leave a physical gap in a building structure. How are developers hiding an entire floor of square footage?
They use a variety of clever workarounds. Often they just skip the number entirely, so the panel jumps from 12 straight to 14.
Just pretending it's not there.
Right. But some developers want continuous numbering, so they will label it 12A or 12B. Others use the letter M, which is the 13th letter of the alphabet, and reserve that entire floor for mechanical equipment.
That's sneaky.
Yeah, and sometimes it gets a special designation, like the pool floor in a specific Radisson hotel in Winnipeg, or a restaurant floor.
Wait, if we just relabel the 13th floor as the 14th floor or the pool floor, it's still physically the 13th floor.
Yeah.
Are we really just tricking ourselves with a coat of paint?
And does a structural collapse or a raging fire care what the elevator button says?
Well, obviously the physical building does not care, but the real estate market absolutely does.
Money. Always money. Landlords are not erasing the number out of a genuine fear of ghosts or bad luck. They are doing it out of a fear of losing profits.
Right, because if a prospective tenant is highly superstitious, they might just back out of a lease entirely. So it is essentially an economic defense mechanism for the developers.
Precisely. And the data actually supports that economic fear. Researchers in Russia analyzed the real estate market and found that 13th floor apartments were genuinely harder to sell compared to identical units on the 12th or 14th floors.
So buyers are actively walking away from perfectly good real estate just because of the number on the door.
They walk away unless they are financially compensated for their anxiety.
What do you mean?
The researchers found that the negative effect on sales was only eliminated when developers offered a literal 10% discount on the 13th floor apartments.
Are you serious? A 10% penalty on a piece of prime real estate just for a number. That is a huge chunk of change.
It is a massive financial hit.
But, indulging this has to cause practical issues. You cannot have thousands of buildings wearing mathematical disguises without confusing someone eventually.
Which is exactly why city planners in Vancouver eventually stepped in and legally banned the practice of skipping the 13th floor.
Oh, wow. Good for them.
Yeah.
I imagine they just got tired of the aesthetic nonsense, or perhaps it was an emergency response issue.
Yeah.
Governments usually don't intervene in private building quirks unless safety is on the line.
You nailed it. It was purely a matter of public safety. In an emergency, first responders rely on incredibly accurate building data.
Right. Every second counts.
Exactly. If firefighters are coordinating a rescue, a conflict between a building's internal numbering and its actual physical floor count from the outside is incredibly dangerous. Real lives were literally being put at risk just to accommodate a psychological phantom.
Man, the Vancouver situation highlights a really fascinating tipping point. It's one thing to change a button to appease a nervous renter. It's another entirely when this phantom infiltrates high-stakes, life-and-death operations.
It crosses a line.
Totally. Let's look at naval history, because the sources mention that too. Sailors are notoriously superstitious, so this must have wreaked havoc on ship designations.
Oh, it severely impacted the British Navy during the First World War. They had a submarine, the HMS K-13, conducting sea trials in 1917.
And I'm guessing things didn't go well?
They didn't. It dove with several vents still open, it sank, and 32 sailors and technicians died.
Oh, it's terrible. Tragic mechanical failure. But knowing how superstition works, I am guessing the number took the blame.
The sequence of events that followed certainly cemented the blame. They raised the submarine, they repaired it, and they renamed it K-22.
Okay, fresh start.
You'd think so. But the following year, it was involved in a massive series of accidental collisions with other British submarines, an incident known as the Battle of May Island. A total of 103 men were killed.
Oh my God, so the ship sinks as the 13, gets a new coat of paint and a new name, and then is involved in an even bigger disaster.
Yes.
I mean, you can completely understand why a sailor would refuse to board anything tangentially related to that number after that.
The Navy clearly understood the psychological toll it took on the men. When they developed their subsequent L class of submarines, they completely skipped the designation L-13. They just went from 12 to 14.
And this psychological phantom does not stop at the ocean surface. It goes all the way into the atmosphere.
It goes all the way to space.
Yes. The Apollo 13 mission is probably the most famous use of the number in modern history.
It is. Apollo 13 launched on April 11th, 1970. And the launch time was exactly 13.13 Central Standard Time.
Come on. You couldn't script that if you tried.
I know, it's wild. And then 2 days later, on April 13th, an oxygen tank exploded. It aborted the moon landing and turned the entire mission into a desperate fight for survival.
Which they thankfully survived.
Yes, the crew safely returned. But the shadow of that near disaster lingered heavily over the agency. During the subsequent space shuttle program, NASA entirely avoided the name STS-13.
Wait, NASA? An organization built on absolute, uncompromising physics and mathematics actively avoided a number.
Well, officially, NASA claimed the naming system changed because of a higher frequency of planned launches.
Oh, sure they did.
Yeah, they implemented this very complex matrix where the first number was the fiscal year, the second was the launch site, followed by a letter. Consequently, the 11th flight, which would have naturally been STS-13, became STS-41C.
That is incredibly convenient timing for a bureaucratic spreadsheet update.
The astronauts on that specific flight certainly noticed the avoidance.
They weren't buying it.
Not at all. They weren't superstitious and actually designed a humorous alternate mission patch featuring a black cat in the number 13. And ironically, they ended up landing back on Earth on Friday the 13th.
No way.
Yeah, which the crew just described as, quote, pretty cool.
I just love that image. Astronauts mocking the superstition in orbit while administrators down on Earth are actively trying to hide the number in a filing cabinet somewhere.
It's a great contrast.
But this panic isn't just about physical danger in space or at sea. It creates literal economic terror. The Irish license plate crisis of 2012 is a perfect example of this.
The Irish situation is a remarkable case study in how fear can actively shape national economies. In Ireland, vehicle registration plates begin with the year of the car. So, a car registered in 2011 starts with 11, 2012 starts with 12, and so forth.
Meaning the impending year 2013 was a looming existential threat for the entire auto industry.
Exactly. The Society of the Irish Motor Industry was legitimately panicking. The economy was already a bit fragile at the time, and they feared that superstitious drivers would simply refuse to purchase a new car if the license plate loudly broadcasted a 13 on the front and back bumpers.
This is incredible. The Irish license plate story is basically a government administering a massive societal placebo.
That's a great way to put it.
They actively altered bureaucratic code to accommodate a magical curse so the auto economy wouldn't tank. How does a placebo like that actually work in practice?
Well, the underlying anxiety remains in the public, but you treat the symptom to relieve the financial pressure. The government intervened and split the registration system just for that specific year.
How do they split it?
Vehicles registered in the first half of 2013 received plates starting with 131, and those in the second half received plates starting with 132. By simply adding a single digit, the entire crisis was averted.
It is wild how the human brain processes that. 13, terrifying. I will crash my car immediately. 131, perfectly safe, here's my money.
It's completely irrational.
We have entire governments and billion-dollar industries just bending the knee to this fear. Has anyone ever looked at this collective delusion and tried to, actively fight back against it?
Actually, there have been organized counter movements throughout history. A really notable one was the 13 Club.
The 13 Club.
Yeah, it was established in 1881 by a U.S. Civil War veteran named Captain William Fowler. He gathered influential New Yorkers with the explicit stated goal of killing off superstitions.
I mean, how do you kill an idea that pervasive?
By weaponizing exposure therapy, they just leaned into it as hard as humanly possible. Their inaugural dinner was held on January 13th, 1881. At exactly 8:300 p.m.
Oh, I love the commitment.
It gets better. 13 people sat in room 13. To even enter the dining room, guests had to physically walk under a ladder, and they ate their meals surrounded by piles of spilled salt.
That sounds like an incredibly theatrical dinner party. But did it work? Did they break the cultural curse?
Well, the clubs became a massive cultural phenomenon for a time. They spread across North America. Astonishingly, 5 future U.S. presidents actually joined their ranks, including Theodore Roosevelt.
Wow, so they had real political weight behind them.
They did. But while the clubs eventually faded away due to a lack of sustained interest, the superstitions themselves proved much more resilient. They survived the attempts to kill them.
I find it fascinating that the fear is so stubborn here, yet it isn't a universal human truth. We've been focusing heavily on North America and Europe, but a numbers power is entirely dependent on its zip code.
If we connect this to the broader global picture, the cultural relativity of numbers reveals how incredibly arbitrary these fears truly are. In many regions, 13 is actually a symbol of fortune.
Really? Where?
Well, before the First World War, 13 was considered extremely lucky in France. It was often featured on good luck charms and postcards. And in modern Italy, 13 is broadly seen as lucky, except, of course, when you were sitting at a dinner table.
Right. The Last Supper rule still applies there. And in Asia, linguistics dictate entirely different phobias, don't they?
Language is an incredibly powerful catalyst for these beliefs.
Yeah.
In Cantonese-speaking areas like Hong Kong, 13 is considered very lucky because its pronunciation sounds similar to the phrase, sure to live.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is. But contrast that with the number 14, which sounds dangerously close to the phrase, sure to die.
So a numbers power is literally just a linguistic pun, and you see this arbitrary assignment of luck everywhere. I was reading the sources about Colgate University. They were founded by 13 men with $13 and 13 prayers. To them, Friday the 13th is literally a day of celebration.
Exactly. It's all about context.
And Taylor Swift famously paints the number 13 on her hand before concerts. And legendary athletes like Dan Marino built entire, highly successful careers wearing it on their jerseys.
Which brings us to other numbers that suffer the exact same fate as 13 in different parts of the world. In many East Asian countries, including China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, the number 4 is heavily stigmatized. This is known as tetraphobia.
Let me guess, another pun.
Exactly. In Mandarin, the word for 4 sounds almost identical to the word for death. This association is so incredibly strong that the Finnish mobile phone giant Nokia actively avoided using the number 4 in most of their model series just to respect the Asian market.
A massive global tech corporation altering its entire product lineup over a homophone. That is staggering. Does Europe have its own localized number terrors beyond 13?
Yes. In Italy, the true source of numerical anxiety is 17 heptadecaphobia.
Wait, 17. Why?
This one stems from Roman numerals. 17 is written as X7. If you rearrange those specific letters, you create the word vic12, which in Latin translates to I have lived.
Which is a very polite past tense way of saying I am currently dead.
That is exactly the implication. Because of this simple anagram, you will find Italian airlines with no row 17 and hotels completely missing room 17. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the number 39 is widely considered a cursed badge of shame, to the point where people will pay to avoid license plates containing it.
So this conclusively proves that the fear of a specific number is not hardwired into human psychology at all. The numerical value itself is entirely meaningless.
It's a blank slate.
Right. It just depends on local language puns, historical accidents, or whether your favorite quarterback won a championship wearing it.
That is the core insight of all these sources, really. Whether a property manager is skipping an elevator floor, or NASA is renaming a space shuttle, or a fan is clutching a lucky number at a concert. Modern humans are engaging in the exact same behavior as our ancestors centuries ago.
We haven't really changed that much, have we?
Not at all. The universe is chaotic, and it's unpredictable. By projecting power onto an arbitrary symbol, like a painted number, we give ourselves an illusion of control over that chaos.
It is a psychological coping mechanism to organize the unknown. Which, brings me to a final thought I want to leave you, our listener, with. In the source material, there's a fascinating observation from a sociologist named Otto Neurath.
Ah, yes.
He looked at this entire phenomenon, the omitted 13th floors, the relabeling, the altered Irish license plates, and he compared it to the use of money in an economy. He called both of them merely a social convention.
That's a profound way to look at it.
Right. Think about those Vancouver city planners we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
They had to legally ban the skipping of the 13th floor because our imaginary social conventions were interfering with literal life-and-death emergency rescues. The firefighters couldn't find the real floor because the building was wearing a mathematical disguise.
It became a physical danger.
Yeah.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, as you navigate your day, walking through buildings and making financial decisions, what other invisible, completely irrational social conventions are entirely shaping the physical world around you, right under your nose?